The fallible aim of Pearl Harbor and the Midway attack.
Welcome to Literary Mindset. Make sure to like and share this video. Also, do not forget to subscribe to our channel.
During the clashes of World War II, the Americans and Japanese battled in the Pacific Ocean for control over Asia. The Japanese desired to expand their empire in Asia, which would ultimately lead to conflicts with European and American powers. The Japanese were able to create a pact with Germany and Italy to expand its influence and force itself into a direct conflict with the United States. In this video, we aim to evaluate the Japanese strategy and political objective against the United States at Pearl Harbor and Midway. The Japanese imperative was to force the United States and her allies to lift embargoes and accept a Japanese economic hegemony in Asia. However, this imperative ultimately backfired on the Japanese. Pearl Harbor's reasoning and aims. In the early 20th century, Japan emerged as a world power that desired to expand itself into China. Japanese Representative Matsuoka Yosuke negotiated a complex deal with Germany and Italy, which created a tripartite alliance between the countries, also known as the Axis powers. The pact would align the fascists and provide Japan with German economic and military assistance. The Japanese and Chinese were already in a conflict termed the Second Sino-Japanese War, with the Japanese conquering and subjugated parts of China. In addition, the Japanese figured that the newly created tripartite pact alliance would stop the United States and Russia from intervening or extending aid to China. The aim was to create a Japanese empire in Asia and remove the American and European powers from the area and replace it with Japanese power and influence. Consequently, the United States responded to the Axis alliance by creating a partial embargo on American scrap iron, steel, and oil to Japan. The Americans passed the Land Lease Act of March 1941 to assist the British with military aid. However, Roosevelt realized that he could use some of the funds to assist China, thus bogging the Japanese down so that the Americans could focus powers on Europe. In response, the Japanese military insisted that the United States must be stopped before assistance to the nationalists produced a real Chinese Air Force, a small modern army, and larger paramilitary forces. Indeed, the Japanese assumed that the Americans did not desire a full-blown war with them, because it would shift the focus from the Nazis and spread the American forces. In July 1941, the Japanese occupied French Indochina, and in response the United States swiftly enacted a full embargo on all metals and oil. Japanese Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku started drafting a plan to attack the Americans, British, and Dutch. Yamamoto and the other Japanese leaders realized that it was imperative to acquire oil from the West, otherwise oil starvation would lead to peril. Thus, they assumed that an attack or perceived attack would bring the Americans to the negotiation table, and they would ultimately end the embargo. A plan was drafted to attack, labeled the Move South Campaign. However, they were unsure where to attack the Americans. Finally, the plan shifted to the elimination of the United States Pacific Fleet based in Hawaii, with its forwarding operating bases at Guam and Wake Island. The Japanese planned on a multifaceted attack that included attacking the Philippines, Pearl Harbor, Malaya, Hong Kong, Wake Island, and Guam. Moreover, Japanese reconnaissance comprehended that the Allies were not ready, nor prepared for the attack. In July 1941, the Japanese attempted to revive negotiations with the Americans, and offered to leave China and Indochina if the world recognized that Japan had a sovereign right to control the economy of China and other Asian territories. The United States did not respond to the imperative, and the Japanese decided that if the United States did not abide by the conditions, an attack would take place in the month of November or December. Indeed, on November 26, the Japanese force set sail west and the forces moved behind a severe Pacific storm to avoid detection. Once the Japanese attacked on December 7, Roosevelt authorized an unrestricted air and submarine warfare attack against the Japanese Empire. Moreover, the Japanese attacked in two waves, with the first containing 183 torpedo planes, dive bombers, and fighters, and the second wave containing 170 level bombers, dive bombers, and fighters. Simultaneously, while the attack was taking place, two Japanese negotiators were meeting with Washington's Secretary Hull. The secretary scolded them when he became aware of the attack, and blasted them with epithets that included pissants and scoundrels. There were 400 military aircraft on Oahu, out of which 183 were destroyed and 159 damaged. In addition, 8 battleships were hit by the Japanese, and there was a total of 2,400 deaths and 1,200 wounded. The United States Navy was feared and revered across the globe, and the Japanese were successful in crippling it with one attack. Undeniably, the Pearl Harbor attack was one of the Japanese's supreme triumphs. Additionally, within 6 months after the attack, the Japanese were able to conquer Hong Kong, Guam, New Britain Island, Bougainville, and Gilbert Island. According to the historian William Murray, the Japanese convinced themselves that the United States had no real gods but profit and consumption, and would respond with peace negotiations from the abhorrent attack. Consequently, the false assumption the Japanese made was countered with American anger, vengeance, and hate compounded with racism. Midway Battle. The Pearl Harbor attack did not result in a United States negotiation, as the Japanese had thought. However, Admiral Yamamoto predicted that their navy could do as it pleased for a year-long period after the Pearl Harbor attack. Furthermore, it may be feasible to win one more battle against the Americans, and it would possibly result in economic negotiations. The Japanese now occupied Hong Kong, and had nearly 100 million new subjects under their colonial yoke. Thus they assumed that their military and political tactics were superior. Intoxicated by their triumphs, the Japanese assumed that they were invisible to the other world superpowers. The belief of superiority led them to the plan to engage the United States in one more battle on the small island of Midway. The Japanese Mitsubishi fighters were the most skilled pilots in the world, and Admiral Yamamoto's plan was to terrorize the small island with them. Before the attack, the United States provoked the Japanese by launching aircraft over Tokyo and bombing the city, which embarrassed and infuriated the Japanese. The plan to attack Midway was termed Operation Me, which divided a fleet into 5 groups that would attack different places. The ships would spread out all over the Pacific, in the hope of deceiving the Americans about the plan to attack Midway. American naval officer Joseph Rochefort and other codebreakers were able to decipher the Japanese plan and reveal the area of the planned attack. The Japanese attempted to launch an attack in the same fashion as Pearl Harbor. However, they did not spot any American air carriers, and were not sure of the American location. The Americans also could not locate the Japanese, and both sides scrambled to find each other. The Americans were capable of long flight from their carriers and land. Additionally, they were able to ambush the Japanese. The Americans used dive bombers to attack the Japanese, and were able to destroy 4 Japanese carriers within minutes. The last Japanese ship was finally sunk during the battle, and the result was an absolute victory for the Americans. The lost battle deprived Japan of its carriers and superior flight pilots. Before the Battle of Midway, the Japanese were on the offensive, and with the Americans defeating them, they were now on the defensive and in a weaker position. Indeed, the balance of power quickly shifted in favor of the Americans. Ramifications. The Japanese assumed that if Pearl Harbor was successfully attacked, the American fleet would be destroyed, and it would be necessary that a peace negotiation would be ultimately reached. The aim of controlling Asia in an economic fashion was the ultimate imperative that the Japanese held. However, they did not consider that the Americans would become vengeful for the attack, and would use their economic and manufacturing potential to create a war economy that would prove to be unstoppable. The Pearl Harbor attack was indeed a victory for Japan, but the Japanese offensive stance would shift to a defensive position with the American victory at Midway. The Japanese had believed that the war with the United States would be short. However, it ultimately became a long war. The real winner of the war was the Allies, because now more focus could be aimed at the Nazis, which placed Hitler in a precarious position.
Thank you for watching this video. Make sure and subscribe to our channel for more historical videos.